Thank you, everybody, and thank you for your patience. I'm Glenn Ruga, the founder and director of the Social Documentary Network, and I'm here today with Barbara Ayotte, the communications director, as well as writers and photographers from this issue of ZEKE magazine. And it's always so great to see so many people here from so many parts of the country and even the world. This is the second of two panels with photographers and writers from the Incarceration issue of ZEKE magazine. And we have with us here today, Antoine Davis, his voice only from the Washington Correction Center in Shelton, Washington. And his call is being facilitated by Beth Seidel. And the photographers with us here today are Massimo Bardetti, Katherin Hervey, Peter Merts, and Howard Zehr. And one of the photographers, Michelle Zausmer, is not able to be with us here today. So I will share her images, but we won't be able to hear from her directly. The incarceration issue of ZEKE was conceived to shine light on an issue that affects millions in the United States. Nearly 2 million people in the US live behind bars, and considering their families and loved ones, the total number affected is many times more than that. And many people who are not directly affected know little about the carceral system. Regardless of guilt or innocence, the basic human and civil rights of detainees must be respected and are too frequently denied. Many are incarcerated because of direct racist policies or because of a history of the US deliberately maintaining an underclass that is subject to all the indignities of poverty, lack of education, lack of opportunity, and broken families. In a few moments, one writer and 4 photographers will talk to us and show us more about this. This issue of ZEKE is available digitally on the ZekeMagazine.com website, and you could also purchase a copy as well, subscription or individual copy from the ZEKE website. Just got these back from the printer after a long delay. If people are subscribers here, they're going in the mail either today or tomorrow. As well as the photographers here who will be getting a copy shortly. And a few things before we get started. This event is being recorded and it will be posted to our SDN YouTube channel in the next day or two. The chat is open. We always like to hear where people are chatting from, so just go ahead into the chat and say hi and let us know where you're chatting from. And each speaker will present their work for approximately 10 minutes. We'll take 1 or 2 questions after each presentation, and then open up for a more general Q&A with all the presenters afterwards. And if you want to ask a question, the easiest thing is just to unmute yourself and ask your question, but you could also use the raise your hand function within Zoom, and I'll call on you, and we'll also try to monitor the chat as well. Our first speaker is Antoine Davis, who's calling from the Washington Correction Center in Shelton, Washington. Antoine is a licensed minister at Freedom Church of Seattle, currently incarcerated, serving a 63-year sentence. His writings have been published in Counterpunch, The Appeal, Your Teen Magazine, and many other outlets. And you can follow Antoine at Twitter at Antoine E. Davis. And Anton wrote the book review in this issue of ZEKE magazine on Death in America, How America Ignores the Truth and What We Can Do About It, by Robert Mitchell and Jay Aronson. And I believe one of the authors is on the Zoom with us today. Okay, so let's turn this over to Antoine, and hopefully this Zoom connection will work.
Hi, I just wanted to first say, thank you for the opportunity to be a part of the panel. It really is a blessing just to be given the chance to speak about what it's like to be a writer from behind bars, as well as all of the ins and outs that go along with it. I guess I can kind of start off with, how I became a writer to begin with. From the time that I was a teenager, I would find myself locked in my room writing music about some of the hardships and the challenges that I had undergone growing up, both in my home and in my community. And for me, it was somewhat of a healthy way to talk about what I saw, what I heard, and what I felt as a kid growing up in an environment where violence, drugs, and other criminal activity was essentially normal. And that was pretty much, you know, my experience with writing up until my 21st birthday, where I was incarcerated and sentenced to 63 years of imprisonment after being convicted as an accomplice to first-degree murder and 3 counts of attempted murder of the second degree. It was at that point that I really, really began to evaluate my life and the decisions that had led me up into that point. As I got more involved with the church and, you know, ministry, both privately and publicly, I found myself having countless conversations with people who spoke to me about some of the traumas that they had experienced growing up in the communities that, you know, I came from, which were Black and indigenous communities of color. And I mean, you know, these men talked about everything from being raped to being molested and being shot at and raised in crack houses. Some of them talked about being transferred from one foster home to another, hoping that they can find a place in someone that would actually, you know, keep them and treat them as if they actually mattered. And so I found myself writing yet again, but this time it went from music to creating sermons that focused specifically on the traumas that many of us as people have experienced and how we could find healing from some of the heartaches that we've had to carry most of our lives. And for me, this was important because, you know, I found that, you know, our society is more inclined to demonize people for the crimes that they have committed without taking the time to consider the root issues that may influence some of our young people to engage in criminal behavior to begin with. And so a little later into my sentence, you know, I met Christopher Blackwell, who inquired about my interest in joining the Writers Development Group with Empowerment Avenue. And they are a nonprofit organization that is designed to amplify the incarcerated voice to speak about the realities within our carceral system and the impact that it creates on our society. And so I began to write about everything from what it looks like to be a father from prison to the dehumanizing experiences that incarcerated people are forced to live with from behind bars. Again, it was important to me because, you know, there are so many acts and policies within the system that were perpetuating the harm on both incarcerated people, their families, and their communities. And then at the same time, these issues that I was addressing went unaddressed and unnoticed by the public. And so writing became more about speaking both truth about the systemic issues that I saw and that I experienced while being incarcerated, as well as providing solutions to those issues that have, in some instances, you know, existed for decades. And so, you know, during the process of writing, I began to learn about the challenges that come with being a journalist from in prison. And we're talking everything from the cost of communicating with editors and publishers to the fear of being retaliated against by the Department of Corrections as a result of me speaking about things that they would never convey to our community. Nevertheless, I found that the line between the fear of retaliation and speaking truth is a line that we as incarcerated writers are forced to live with. And I think that I've, you know, pretty much come to a place in my life where I would rather speak truth, knowing that the carceral system can never be held accountable if our society goes uninformed about the injustices that exist within the system. And I think that, you know, this is one of the main reasons why the book Death in Custody, written by Jay Aronson and Roger Mitchell, really hit home for me. You know, although they were, you know, talking about the importance of adding a checkbox to the death certificate so that they can monitor the amount of people who have lost their lives while encountering law enforcement. Essentially, you know, what they're talking about is the importance of providing our public with accurate information that will help us hold the criminal legal system accountable for what it does and what it doesn't do to those under its care. And this is critical. especially if our justice system is perpetuating harm, all the while destroying the communities that it claims to protect. And so this is somewhat of a synopsis as to why I got involved in this kind of work to begin with. This is probably the dominant motivating factor that actually keeps me writing from a place of being incarcerated.
Well, I just want to say to Antoine, I just think it's extraordinary what prison writers are able to do, given all the challenges and all the things that the prison system makes impossible for you to write. I mean, what you talked about, losing 30 or 40 hours of work because there's no way you could back anything up is just extraordinary. And Beth, I don't know if Antoine is hearing me with the system you have holding the phone up, but I hope he was able to hear that.
Antoine, did you get that?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
we really appreciate you.
All right. Thanks, Antoine. We're going to move on now. Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks. All right. Our next speaker is Howard Zehr. Howard is Distinguished Professor of Restorative Justice at Eastern Mennonite University in Virginia. He's internationally recognized as one of the founders and leaders of restorative justice and has been active as a professional photographer throughout his career. His publications include 6 books, including one on children whose parents are incarcerated, one highlighting Virginians and their pickup trucks, and the Little Book of Contemporary Photography, which presents a meditative approach. Howard will be speaking about his article in ZEKE, Still Doing Life 25 Years Later. And I'll be sharing Howard's images, but Howard, why don't you just give us a brief introduction first?
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you. It's nice to be here this afternoon. I'm glad everything's working. Well, the portfolio that was in ZEKE and that you're going to see in a few minutes are portraits and excerpts of interviews with men and women in Pennsylvania who are serving real life sentences 25 years apart. The first were in the early 90s, the second were in 2017. They're taken from a traveling exhibit that is traveling right now, and then the larger interviews and portfolio is in a book called Still Doing Life, 22 lifers, 25 years later, that came out this year. In Pennsylvania, a life sentence is a real life sentence that you just don't get out unless the governor commutes or there's court action, and the governor very rarely commutes. The women will tell you they almost never commute women. And there's a few cases where, because of Supreme Court ruling about incarcerating or life sentences for people under 18, that a few people have gotten out. But it's a growing problem. There are 55,000 people serving life without parole in the U.S. as a whole, last time we checked. And they're getting old. That's an aging population, and that's another whole layer of challenge. I did the book itself with my colleague Barb Taves, although I did all the photographs and interviews, but Barb was instrumental in getting the book out. The project began in the early 90s. I was working in Pennsylvania prisons with restorative justice, and I was meeting lifers. And I got this idea of doing portraits and interviews with lifers. I went and met with a group of lifers, and I showed them projects that I had done before, documentary projects, and explained the idea, and they really liked it. I said, well, you're going to have to be my informants, my guides to this, and you're also going to have to be accountable to you to make sure I'm telling the truth, that I'm not misrepresenting people. So I did that. It resulted in some traveling exhibits and then a book called Doing Life that came out in 1996. It's against the rules now in Pennsylvania to show prisoners' faces and names, but through the intercession of a friend who was a former head psychologist for the Department of Corrections in Pennsylvania, in 2017, I got access to go back and re-interview and photograph 22 of those same men and women. In the original round, I had done about 75. I think 50 some were in the book Doing life. So in the first round, the conversations had been a lot about life sentences, how you would explain a life sentence, how you envisioned it, what metaphors you used, and so forth. The second round in 2017 were more, how were you coping? What have you learned through all these years? How are you doing? That kind of thing. As Glenn said, this is really a series of 4 books in a way. There's the 2 lifer books. There's the book that's the children of parents, children who have parents in prison, and then a book of victims of severe crime, all of which use the same basic format of studio type portraits and interviews. My goal here in these projects was really to humanize people and to encourage a real dialogue. So much of our dialogue or discussion about crime and justice is done in terms of generalizations and stereotypes. I wanted people to confront real people and to hear real people and to see real people. And I wanted to to reduce othering. So much of our photography, and especially photography of prisoners, is othering. It creates a sense of them other than we are. It just provokes all our stereotypes and generalizations. We see the bars, we see the tattoos, and that forms our opinions right from the start. I wanted to try to reduce that. So I used a portable studio kind of setup. I photographed people the way I'd want to be photographed. I used a waist level finder because I find that if you don't have something in front of your face, if you're looking down as if you're almost bowing to people, that it facilitates relationships. I always do the interviews first because we build a relationship in the interviews, and then I do the portrait at the end. But again, I wanted us to confront the eyes, the faces of real people. I wanted to try to help build bridges between us. The values that underlie my photography work are the same ones that I think underlie the restorative justice philosophy. And that restorative justice is really a relational approach to justice that puts a lot of emphasis on harm that's been done, the obligations that result from the harm, the importance of engaging everybody, those who have been harmed and those who caused harm in the process. And I like to say there are 3 underlying values that start with R: respect, relationships, and responsibility. And I've tried through my photography to use and encourage those same values. As Glenn said, I did a book years ago called Little Book of Contemplative Photography. In that, I talk about photography as receiving instead of taking, and about the importance of collaborating with your so-called subject. And that's what I've tried to do here. So I tried to work collaboratively with these lifers. I've tried to be accountable to them in the sense of asking them to make sure that I wasn't misrepresenting them. I've tried to do it in a way that would be useful to them as well as to me. So there have been some exhibits that the prisoners in Pennsylvania, the lifers, had an exhibit that I created they could use in the prison. And I've tried to, and they've been the ones that have informed me. After all, even though I spent a lot of time working in prisons, I don't live there. And I needed people who did to tell me where the pitfalls were, who to talk to, who not talk to, and so forth. So that's a brief take on it. I'm open to questions as we go here, but that's basically what I have to say about this at this point.
All right, well, thank you for that, Howard, and for sharing these extraordinary photos of these diptychs. Just fascinating. But you know, we have a little bit of time. Can you tell us something specific about one of these groups of portraits? Maybe this man here. Can you tell us something about him?
Yeah, Harry Twiggs. This is great. So the first round of photographs I had done were very short interviews. There was a traveling exhibit, and then there was a magazine, a national magazine, and I heard from the lifers at one prison. They said, you know, we like what you did here, but you didn't go deep enough. Hey, we want to know what these people were like before they came in. I mean, when they came in, all that. And so I sat down, went to this other prison. I sat down with about a dozen lifers, and we talked, and then I said, tell you what, some of you have a photograph, a Polaroid of when you came in. Well, this was pre-digital. I'll do a Polaroid of you now down in front of you, and we'll talk about who you were then and who you were there now. And that resulted in some really substantial interviews that made the first book really possible. And Hervey was one of these. Hervey describes himself as one of the architects. He was of the violence of urban America. He said he was there in the early days. He did terrible things. He said also, though, he says, I think we get two lives. He said, the first life, we do all these terrible things. The second life, we can make amends. We can help other people avoid these things. And he really dreams. He's a certified peer specialist in prison. He spends a lot of his time with the young guys coming in off the streets, trying to help them turn their lives around. But he just one quote from him that really struck me in that first interview. We got to talking about respect. And I said, Harry, when you were on the street in Badlands of North Philly, what gave you respect? He said, well, it's the opposite of what you want. What do you hope for? He said, when I stole something and my buddies knew it, he said, that gave me respect. He said, when I held a gun up against somebody's head, that gave me respect. He said, I remember my first arrest. I rode through my community in the backseat of a police car. He said, it was the proudest moment of my life. That really stuck with me, and is really a story that I've used often in talking about justice. But and Harry's a passionate guy these days for turning lives around. He spends all day in prison working with young guys coming in and with people who've been through traumatic experiences.
Does anybody have any questions for Howard or comments on the photos? Just unmute yourself if you do.
Yeah, hi. I've got a question. Am I right that these photographs appear in two different books, spaced some years apart, as opposed to a book that shows these kinds of comparisons side by side?
The first book has only the early 90s one. Still still doing life has, still doing life has these two photographs paired together and interviews from both years. So you get the exhibit, and also the ZEKE magazine has short quotes from the 2 years. But yeah, the second book is a longitudinal study, as my publisher likes to say, of these people 25 years apart.
Oh, great. Thank you. That's the comparison's very powerful. So I was hoping that, one of the books showed both.
It does. It does.
Yes.
So does the traveling exhibit.
Thanks.
All right, thanks, Howard. And we could come back and discuss these pictures at the end when we have an open Q&A. But let's move on to our next presenters now. So our next presenters will be speaking together, Katherin Hervey and Massimo Bardetti. They'll be speaking about their article in ZEKE, The Prison Within. Massimo is an experienced technologist with a focus on visual arts. He started his career in the TV and film industry, where he worked in various positions to transition those media to the digital age. Later, he led software teams at Microsoft, Amazon, and smaller startups. He's the cinematographer and co-producer of the award-winning film, The Prison Within, and he has a lifelong passion for photography. Katherin Hervey is an artist and an award-winning filmmaker interested in what is hiding in the dark crevices of the American landscape and collective psyches, believing truth is found in the dark before it shines in the light. Her first feature film, The Prison Within, won 8 awards. A thought leader in criminal justice reform, Katherin has been featured in various media publications. Her mixed media artworks and creative fiction have been showcased in galleries and literary journals. Okay, Massimo and Katherin.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity, and thank you for everyone for being here.
Thank you.
Should I just jump in and start bringing up the images here?
Yeah, that would be great.
Cool. All right. Let me
So these
go.
were all taken at San Quentin prison.
Yeah, so some of these are photographs and some of them are film stills, but these were all taken inside San Quentin prison. We went in there 3 times, 3 days to shoot restorative justice circles, really, where the men, and here this is Sam Johnson, he's one of them. They are all taking place in, I believe it's like over a year-long program where the men come together and connect the dots of their lives that led them to commit their crime. And all of them, all of the men that we filmed and that we photographed here, they all had, like 25 to life, like very extreme sentences, all for murder. And the goal of the film, The Prison Within, is to kind of dive into our collective systemic prisons that we all share, but also how do we move through our individual traumas and our individual prisons. And my goal with the film was really for people, viewers, to really see themselves reflected in the men in the film. So to go into the film thinking that they have absolutely nothing in common with Sam and Poon and the other men, but really realizing that they do. And it's, kind of like, but for a specific set of circumstances, this could be me as well, right? That we're all survivors, we're all victims before we harm other people, and that's all something that we can all relate to. And so that was really the goal of the film. And so, like here in this photo, this is Sam Johnson in circle, and he's reading a forgiveness letter that he had written to his father, who was an alcoholic and severely abused him, and also kind of processing of the racism that he experienced, of course, growing up in South Carolina in his youth was very extreme. Let's see. So yeah, this is Eddie Herrera, and again, they're going deep. They're really processing and sharing their lives and their experiences and their remorse. This is Sam in his cell. You can see here that the cells here in these older prisons here in San Quentin, like this is it. This is a cell, and this is for 2 people. So there's a top bunk here and then also a lower bunk. This is Michael Nelson, and again, he's deep in his process about his crime.
Yeah, I wanted to say something about the circle process. It was being there and witnessing, as I was photographing them and recording them, these men going so deep. It was life-changing. The amount of the level of accountability and the vulnerability that I were able to show was touching, and I was it was life-changing for me being in there filming. This was done over the course of a year or so. Still, some of those moments still stay with me. Powerful.
Yeah, definitely levels of accountability and vulnerability that we rarely experience out here.
Yeah.
And to go into a prison with the supposed worst of the worst, people who have these like really extreme long sentences and are supposedly according to society and according to the judges that sentence them not worthy to be out here with us, are actually, of course, the most worthy, as I think probably most of us who are on this Zoom know. And yeah, this is Poon, and he came over from Cambodia as a refugee. And you know, I think there was like 5 kids. They came over, they didn't speak the language, they were refugees, so he got involved in gangs very early on. And he actually had a 35 to life sentence. I don't want to give too much of the film away because you guys should watch the film, but Poon actually received parole after his 35 to life sentence, but is now in Cambodia. He didn't receive any freedom. He was picked up by ICE and taken to an immigration center and deported to Cambodia because of his refugee status.
He didn't even speak the language anymore.
Yeah.
He grew up here in the States. He came here when he was like a little child.
Yeah, he doesn't have any family there.
Doesn't have any
So,
family,
but I'm in touch with him, and you know, yeah, if anyone wants to know, there's links to offer support to Poon. This is Nate Collins, and he's still in. He has 60 to life. Really beautiful story that he shares in the film, where he goes really deep into his own accountability.
His story is a tragic to, yeah.
And you know, he had the longest sentence here, 60 to life. And you know what people say, and which is true, is that you know he got his sentence because he was Black, and it took place in Richmond, California. And I subscribe by that. This is actually really one of my favorite photos. This is Barry, who's also part of the film. He was a veteran, and he handed someone a gun that ended up killing someone, and he received, I think, a 26-year sentence, something like that. But he came in as this big shot caller for the white supremacists. And yeah, and you know, now here he is with Nate cracking up. So it's a really cool photo. And then this is Nate in circle, where he's sharing about his crime. And as you can see, he's there's a lot of emotion there. There's a lot of emotion.
Yeah. I mean, he's you know, growing up, he wanted to be a musician. You know, he wanted like a classic musician.
He played the clarinet.
He played the clarinet, and you know the story on how his dreams were crushed by his father and his brothers, and
the life
that was around him. You know, it's very tragic, and yeah.
And I'm in touch with everybody here still. This is Barry sharing his, you know, connecting the dots really of the abuse by his father into the military and into his crime. This is the men kind of coming together at the end of the circle, you know, just closing out the circle, giving it the respect that it's due. This is San Quentin. I think these are just, yeah, kind of like a little bit of extra photos. And these were here on the cell blocks, and I really like these photos. This one, I put the camera down onto the concrete here, and I think it created some really cool perspectives. This is everyone just kind of hanging out. Yeah, and I thought this was really interesting. The TVs are, you know, are transparent, you know, because there's no trust here, like to make sure that there's no contraband or anything like that in them. So yeah, those are the photos.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing those. Did you say that this was all shot within a 3-day period in the prison? Did I get that right?
Yeah, like on and off through a year.
Yes. A total of 3 days.
A total of 3 days.
Yeah.
And is all the footage in the film from those 3 days in prison, or did you shoot any on the outside as well?
Oh yeah. There's some on the outside. In the film, it's It's about survivors and the men inside, and we follow both. So we follow survivors of violence as well, and we follow this one woman, Dion Wilson, whose husband was murdered. He was a police officer, and we follow her through her experience of realizing that her so vehemently wanting the death penalty for the man who killed her husband didn't bring her any healing. And so she starts this restorative path, and then she comes into the prison in the film as well, and sits with the men and heals with the men and cries with the men. And yeah, so it's yeah, inside San Quentin and outside as well in the Bay Area. Takes place in the Bay Area.
And how can we view the film? Is it available in streaming?
Yeah, it's on Amazon, Apple TV, Tubi, Vudu, cable channels, all the things.
Oh, great.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Anybody have any questions for Katherin or Massimo? Okay, but I'm sure we'll have some more questions at the very end. All right, why don't we move on to our last presenter now? Peter Merts will be speaking about his project, Quests for Authenticity, Artists in California Prisons. Peter Mertz's photography spans documentary, portrait, and fine art forms, and has been published in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and others. In 2015, Peter and Dr. Larry Brewster published Paths of Discovery, Art Practice and its Impact in California State Prisons. In spring 2022, Peter published a monograph of his photographs as Ex Crucible, The Passion of Incarcerated Artists. Okay, Peter.
Thank you, Glenn. Yeah, let's share screen. All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming today. Thanks to SDN, ZEKE Magazine, and Glenn for this opportunity to talk about our work. For 15 years, I've been photographing art classes in California prisons. And I occasionally get questions of what it's like inside these art classrooms. And today, let's see. Whoops, I'm frozen here. Yeah, I seem to be spinning. Oh, there we go. Okay, let me try this again. There seems to be a delay.
Well, there will be a delay from what you see on your screen and what Zoom is showing. There's a little bit of a delay.
So let's try this again. So, okay, here we go. Now it's running. Okay, sorry. So for over 15 years, I've been photographing art classes in California prisons, and I occasionally get the question what it's like inside these prisons. So today I'm going to take you on a brief tour of art classes in California prisons and explain a little bit of my process. Few prisons in California have a dedicated art space. So instructors typically just find what space they can to hold their class. This, for example, is a theater class taking place in the Old Stone Chapel at Folsom State Prison. This is a drum class in a gym at Avenal State Prison. Here's a Latin drum class in a chow hall. And this is a class in a windowless classroom. And I mention windowless classrooms because that's where most of the classes happen, without windows, without natural light. So as you can imagine, that's a horrible environment for photography. All the light is from the top, and it's ultraviolet, or it's fluorescent. So I usually take my own lights in, unless there's, I am in a room with windows, I take my own lights. So what these physically varied classrooms have in common is that they're safe spaces. They're safe both physically and emotionally for the participants. How can there be safe spaces in prison, you ask? Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the teaching artists, the instructors, the art instructors. The instructors are all professional artists, and they also have the personality that allows them to be effective teachers in prisons. This is a singing class, voice class. This is Norton Buffalo, who passed away some years ago, but he was teaching a workshop at San Quentin, and he's a well-renowned blues harmonica player, and he was demonstrating a technique of how to blow his harp, and he wanted each person in the room, he asked them for them to put their hands on his throat while he used this technique so they could feel the vibration in his throat. Classical guitar. These instructors, in my experience, they tend to be pretty good listeners. This is a creative writing class. Another creative writing class, a different prison. It's not always easy being an art instructor in a prison. This was the last class before the performance, and a choreographic problem had evolved, which they were having a hard time solving. So the instructor here is desperately trying to figure a way to get the show moving again. The life-size paper dolls, which you see across the floor, represent the women in the men's lives, and they interact with these paper dolls during the performance. It's a dance and spoken word performance. Now, this is an instructor demonstrating emotion. This is a theater class. This instructor is helping the artist with his face paint. And this last image of the instructors shows a Native American instructor. He's teaching Native American beadworking. And you can see he's lost his fingers in an accident, a fire. And he provides great inspiration to his students, I believe. These safe spaces and the instructors allow free expression, which I think makes a huge difference in the tone of these classes. So this is a theater, Commedia dell'arte theater form. This is Hamlet in rehearsal. And this is a man in a podcasting class. He's being interviewed by a fellow student, and he's talking about his life. So sometimes emotion is performative, as in this case, and sometimes it's very personal. This is a Shakespearean theater class. They're doing a workshop, an exercise. This is a modern dance class in a women's prison. There are 10 times as many men's prisons as there are women's prisons in California. It's about 3 to 30 now, the ratio. This freedom of expression allows trust to develop between the students and with the instructors. And that trust, as you can imagine, it's a topic that's been touched on by other speakers here, is really important to the success of the program. This amazing environment that I walked into with my camera, however, presented a dilemma. As you photographers know, when you bring a camera into a space, it can really change things. So the dilemma I faced was, how do I photograph these scenes without destroying the trust? Well, over time, I've developed some strategies for that. I contact the teaching artists weeks in advance of a proposed shoot, and I figure out with them when would be the best time to do the shoot based on what's going on in the class. Some classes are more photogenic than others. I also prefer to shoot a class in the second half rather than the first half, because in the second half, everybody's gotten to know each other. The initial anxiety is lessened and people are hitting on all cylinders. For performance classes, I usually prefer to photograph process during rehearsals as opposed to a final performance. It just seems more real to me. I asked the instructors if I can have 5 minutes at the beginning of each art class to address the students. And when I do, I explain that I'm photographing their classes as a volunteer. I'm doing it to promote prison art classes and other prison programming. I let them know that my flashes will fire every time I shoot. And I let them know I like to work really close, that I'm going to be getting right in there with my camera. But I want to respect everyone's personal space. So I let them know if I get so close that I'm in the way or they can't think about what they're doing, can't think about their art, just to give me a signal and I'll back off. So I want everyone, again, to feel safe, even though there's a camera in the room. One question I get often is, do I give prints to the artists that I photograph? The short answer is no, unfortunately, for a couple of reasons. One, I'm prohibited from receiving anything from an incarcerated person or giving anything to an incarcerated person. Also, because some of the classes that I shoot are 60, 70 people in them, some of the theater dance classes, it could be really difficult logistically to get prints to the incarcerated people. They move around, they're released. So I've developed a workaround since I'm not able to give prints to the men and women that I photograph. And in order to explain that workaround, let me talk for a minute about families. Now, Antoine was talking about families, the importance of them, and that's been true in my experience as well. Not every incarcerated person is in contact with family members outside, but most of them are, and the families are very important. The families come to art events, and families even participate in the arts events. This is a man who's getting his face painted on for a theater class by his two daughters. Now, this man actually is out now. And in fact, a number of the men that I photographed that you're looking at today, men and women, are out and free now. But this was a class that the girls and the mother came as well and were able to support their dad and had a good time with it. This photo was made just a few weeks ago, so this fellow is probably still incarcerated. Incarcerated artists make photos of their loved ones. They also do commissions for other incarcerated people and even for staff. I've even heard of the warden commissioning work from some incarcerated artists. You can see here, there's some wives here, there's some children. That top left one, you can see there's a proud father holding an image that he drew in graphite of his daughter wearing her graduation regalia. Artists reach through my camera to their families on occasion, which I just love. And I always take these photos and I always publish them to my archive, to my website when the artist requests it. So back to families and what I do with regards to prints. During those 5 minutes that I'm speaking to the class before I start shooting, I give each person in the class one of these slips of paper. It's just a small slip of paper. This is an 8.5 by 11 page, which is broken up. And on the back is a Spanish version. This explains how the photos that I'm going to shoot that day can be found on the internet within 2 or 3 weeks. Now, this information is of no use to incarcerated people because they don't have access to the internet. But they give this to their families, and then their families can see the photos that I've made of their loved ones. And I get a lot of emails from families in appreciation for the photos. I've also connected a printing service to my website with a widget, so the families can also order prints for my website. I don't take any profit from that. In fact, I subsidize that service because the families really enjoy having hard copy prints. And the families will sometimes mail those prints in to the prison so their loved ones can see them. One other thing I'm able to do with regards to the families is reproduce the art for visual art classes that are made by the students. This is a watercolor. Birds are a common topic in prison. You can imagine why. As are cultural symbols. A lot of men and women I found really delve into their culture with their art. This is a self-portrait. The next several photos are self-portraits of artists. This is Omid. He's out now. Lives in the San Francisco area. A terrific artist. This is Fred. Frederick is out now. The hand in the foreground is the hand of the artist. So this is a scene from this childhood. Sorry, I get choked up thinking about these stories sometimes. The figure on the lower left of this painting is the artist. That's what's his name? Bruce. This entire, it's a painting. The entire frame, as you can see, is quite elaborate. It was made out of paper. And at the very bottom, you can see there's a scroll with a little wheel. And if you turn the wheel, you'll see a message scroll, which explains this whole scene. So it's a very elaborate piece. This is a three-dimensional piece made almost entirely of paper. It's about 12 inches long. A life-size face mask. Another mask. Now, one of the final things that I'm able to do to offer to the artists and their families is whenever I have time at the end of a class after I've documented the process, I'll try to do some portraits. So I've got some portraits. I would like you to meet some of these artists through their portraits. This is a level 4 prison, the highest security level. This man was very shy of my camera, and there was the whole trust issue, right? His friend put his hand on the man's back to calm him. Storytelling class. This is a trans woman. Trans women are housed in men's prisons in California. There you have a brief tour of prison art classes in California.
Wow, thank you for that, Peter. Extraordinary photos on your part and extraordinary artwork that the prisoners create. It's really quite stunning. Is this an ongoing project? You're still working on this right now?
It is ongoing. It was, of course, paused during the pandemic, but I'm gearing back up now, and I've been traveling lately up and down the state to continue this work, yes.
Any comments or questions for Peter? And if you do, just unmute yourself. Before we go on to an open Q&A, I just want to share the work with one other photographer, the last photographer who hasn't been able to present at either of these documentary matters. She's out of the country right now, but I told her I would show her work. So this is Michelle Zausmer. I'm going to share my screen and her photographs. 1 second. These photographs were taken at the, sorry, get back to this, the Las Colinas Detention and Reentry Center for Women in California. And it's mostly a reentry story, as these women are transitioning out of prison. And this actually made it to the cover of ZEKE magazine. And I do encourage you to look at this project and all of these projects on the ZEKE website, which provides greater context than what we're able to do here in this panel discussion. But Michelle talks about these photographs and her work. All right, so why don't we open this up for a discussion? And I'd just like to throw out the first question that both of the photographers today and the photographers who spoke in part one of Photographing Incarceration all spoke about how difficult, if not impossible, it is to photograph people in prison, yet everybody seems to, one way or another, have managed to do that. So can one of the photographers today talk about the challenges of photographing in prison today? And just remember to unmute yourself.
I can speak to that a little bit, Glenn. So I found it very difficult initially to get access. But one of the things I love about long-term projects is that over years I was able to develop allies in the Department of Corrections, in the California Arts Council, who runs these programs, and also in the teaching organizations. So it has fortunately become easier for me. So I recommend people just use perseverance and patience, and it can get easier.
Anybody else?
Persistence, I agree.
You know, technically, the difficulty is also is that you're pretty much a one-man band. You know, you have to deal with, especially when filming too. You have to. We were only Katherin and I were allowed in. You know, we had to take care of lighting, sound, everything on our own, while also engaging with the subjects, with the man. So it was the first time it was very challenging. You know, it became easier as you you know learn a little bit how things work.
You don't really quite know what room you're going to be in, right? So like Peter was saying, what's the lighting going to be like, you know, for us too, what are the acoustics? But I mean, you know, really like it's persistence, because they're going to say no. Like you just, you know, like their first response is going to be no. And so you kind of have to be very persistent. And I would say that you also need to give them a reason how it will also be of value to them, meaning the administration, like the CDCR in California, or the warden of that prison. Otherwise, they're not really interested in you coming in with a camera.
Sorry, you're reminding me of another thing that actually was helpful to me, which is that I partnered with the teaching organizations, and I sort of piggybacked and went in with them, which I think Katherin and Massimo didn't have an organization that could help you out like that. So that was a big help for me.
No, I agree. We did have buy-in from the Insight Prison Project, which is who we filmed. That was the program that we filmed. And so, yeah, I agree. That was also a really big part of it, so that it became about the Insight Prison Project. It became about the Vogue program. It wasn't necessarily about the film.
Mm-hmm.
In my case, I was fortunate that I had long-term relationships with lifers and also with the administration. The second round, it wouldn't have happened though because there really are very clear rules about it. But again, long-term relationships won out. And so, I mean, it's a long story, but I was very surprised to get in, but it was only because of those kind of relationships.
Any questions from anybody else? And again, just please unmute yourself and just speak up. Right. I have another observation. A lot of the photographs we're publishing in ZEKE magazine are from California and the West Coast, and the conditions there don't look as bad as the prejudice I may have had before starting this project. And I'm wondering if we're looking at the best prisons one could look at in the United States, and if we'd be seeing something different in other parts of the country.
Yeah.
I can speak to North Carolina, and I think that I've been thinking about looking at these images in both of these sets of discussions, that one of the things about prison is that you can't see the things that make life there so difficult for people. And in North Carolina, if you go in and you take a picture of one of my reading workshops, or I did a photo poetry writing workshop, that makes the prison look a lot more palatable than it is. And basically the prisons are crowded, they're violent, you have no control over your daily life. you have very little control over your relationships outside. And those things, I think it was someone said that it's in the, that you present projects that the prison will find acceptable, and that the parts of prison that are we're not seeing in these pictures and that you don't see in any state are the things that we're not allowed to see, that we're not going to be visually exposed to. So I think you have to count more on the prison writers and the people who come out of prison and write about their experience. You don't get to take a picture of the tension in one of those tiny cells between two people who are not getting along, for instance.
Yeah,
But
I would agree with that. They're not gonna take you to, let you film solitary confinement cells or anything like that. Yeah, and I have also noticed in San Quentin, at least, watching other films, that they tend to always show the same things, that it's always like the educational building,
yeah,
the ramp leading to the educational building and the yard. And we were lucky enough to get into the cells, but that was really only after creating some trust with
Yeah.
public information officers. So that I think we did that on our third shoot, because he really saw that we weren't there to exploit the men, really. And at that point, a lot of trust was developed with the administration, but that took a while.
Yeah.
Simone, it's interesting what you say about the writing, because one of the more interesting pieces in ZEKE magazine is an article written by April Harris, who's incarcerated in Chino, California. And it's just about her day-to-day experiences in prison. And it does give that other side of prison that photographs can't always give when you're being directed as to where you can photograph and where you can't photograph.
Yeah, I did. I put in the chat, I put the oral history that I did. And even doing that, there's just so much that anyone, even who totally trusts you, I worked with this man for 5 years, and still there are things that he would spare me. He's it's very hard for these people to talk about the things that are the most traumatic. And so as an artist, you're kind of, I feel like you're doing the front and not the background. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I was also thinking, when I was looking at the film, Glenn is sending me some copies of ZEKE to bring inside the prison and show to the men. I'm interested in hearing how they react to these presentations of prison. But also I was thinking about that film, and I don't know, I'd have to have a lot of inside support to show that film inside of the prison. As you know, I show a documentary once a month, but I'd have to be pretty sure that I had some support people in the room to show a film like that, because it's going to bring up things that they don't usually expose me to, if that makes any sense. They spare me that.
Katherin, were you able to show your film in the prison?
We're working on it now. I think it's actually finally going to happen.
Especially in San Quentin.
Yeah, in San Quentin, I think we're finally able to put that together. The film came out, we premiered at the Santa Barbara Film Festival in January 2020. And then COVID happened, of course. So yeah, so we're really kind of just now able to start facilitating that, but it does look like it's going to happen.
One of the advantages of combining interviews with, you didn't get to see the interviews in the portfolio we just saw, but some of the lifers do talk about conditions. They certainly talk about life sentences and some of the conditions around that in the interviews.
Other comments? Katherin, I'm always interested as to how video translates to still photography, and I think you've done a good job with that, because sometimes when you just take 1/24th of a second from a video and make that into a capture, it's kind of hard to also maintain the integrity of a still photographic image. But I think the two of you did a very good job with that, with those images.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I wish that we could have had like really big, beautiful photos again, because so much of them were were film stills. But yeah, it definitely took some time to go through and find the right ones that were, you know, where you could get some good resolution and emotion and all of that. Yeah, so thank you.
Howard, on the other side, I mean, your photographs are so photographic. You know, the detail of the people is just so incredible. I just love being able to spend time looking at these faces up close like that and really seeing all the details in the human expression.
Well, the original was done mostly on a Hasselblad. I missed that, but of course, the second round was digital.
Well, they look pretty good too. Well, and we're just seeing it here through Zoom. I'm sure looking at prints would be a very different experience.
One thing about the photos is that many of the prisons ask to review my photos before I publish them. Those that don't ask to review my images, I ask them to review my images anyway. So basically, I don't publish anything under my archive that hasn't been cleared by the prison, just because I want to keep my reputation pristine with the prison. I don't want me to accidentally post something that later comes back to bite me. So I find that permission's a really useful tool for me.
Have they rejected anything?
But occasionally, mostly in the beginning, I think before they knew me and my work as well, occasionally an image there was an image that was denied because there was a clothing infraction. A man had created a dress tie with a piece of paper and put it on because he knew I was going to photograph his portrait. So he made a beautiful little black tie and clipped it onto his neck, and he looked really sharp. But the PIO rejected that photo because it was non-standard dress. I have had some public information officers object to some of the tattoos, some of the objectionable tattoos on some of the folks, but that actually only happened once. And they seem more comfortable now with letting me publish whatever it is that I find.
Are you getting permissions from all the participants?
Yes, actually the prison requires that. During my 5-minute talk to the men or women explaining what I'm doing, I'll ask them to either opt in or opt out. And the opt-ins have to sign a form, a CDCR form. So they all do give me their written permission to photograph them before I start shooting.
One thing that might be of interest to people, I always, well, for both the Lifer Project and the victims of severe crime, I always begin my conversation with saying, at the end of this, I'm going to ask you to sign a release, or otherwise I can't use it. If you tell me anything here that you do not want me to use, or you want me to check first, we will write that on the form. And what I found is that it really frees people up. So people, particularly on the victim side, told me things they hadn't even told their families before. And in most cases, in the end, they decided they wanted to use it. But I think it's really important to let people know that they are in control of these things. And I also have had victims tell me at the beginning, I don't know if I can do this. I've had such bad experience with journalists, and I say, you tell me we're done and I'm out of here. And then 3 hours later, they don't want to quit. So I think it's really important to let them be in control of it.
Peter, you brought up tattooing. Is much of that done in prison or before people arrive in prison, or both?
I think both. There's a lot of tattooing that goes on in prison, but yeah, some of the finer work. I mean, it tends to be pretty rough work inside because it's illegal in California prisons because of the hygiene issues. But yeah, so there's a lot of tattoos inside.
The interesting thing, and some of my Lifer friends who've been there a long time are now getting their tattoos removed. They're finding at the end of the year, if the budget still has medical procedure money left, they can get them removed. So that's the opposite of it.
When I was teaching in a room that had an old some old stereo and electronic equipment in the closet, I had to make sure that closet was locked because that equipment is used for tattooing. So people strip down, you know, wires, anything they can get on to make these tattoos. So they're not sanitary. They're not safe, but they're very common.
As we see, yeah.
Can I make one comment and a question?
Sure.
This is Kent Fairfield. I'm interested in how you talk about building relationships and how the boundaries there start off as pretty severe. And in some ways, we all face that unless we're shooting our very best friends or family. And I think we can learn a lot from how, over time, you can develop a trust with your subjects and they can develop trust for you. And for most of us, that just means being authentic and not asking unreasonable things, but showing your care. And I think we can learn a lot from what you've accomplished with some people who could be considered very separate, very foreign, but you've overcome that, which is really cool. Anybody want to comment on what that was like?
Building trust, you mean, with the subjects?
Yeah.
I really agree with what you said. I think it's all about authenticity, and I really believe that especially people in prison, and especially people who are in prison who have been in a long time, have really well-developed bullshit meters, and which makes sense. And yeah, I think if you just show up authentically and with a lot of compassion and you're honest about why you're there and what you're trying to achieve, and make it collaborative, you know, like I think like Peter did a really good job of detailing that, right? Like they're not necessarily subjects, like they're, you know, we're co-participating really in creating something beautiful and impactful. And yeah, but I think it's really about being authentic.
On that first round, when I did the first round in the early 90s, I did it first at a big Graterford prison, one of the biggest maximum security prisons in the US. And when I finished in that prison, I said to the guys, you know, I need letters of reference or something from you. I just kind of laughed. They couldn't do that. But, you know, when I go to how am I going to, you know, build trust in other places? But, you know, if you show your work, if you're authentic, if you let people, as I said, be in control, it doesn't take long. And then once some of these books came out, of course, and people knew the work, then that really helped as well.
I do occasionally get a person, one or a few people in a class who don't want to be photographed. And that's fine with me, because I don't know what that person's been through, you know, what's going on in their life. So it's if it's a dance class or a theater class where everybody's moving around a lot, it can be challenging for me to avoid photographing that one or those two or those three people amidst the 20 or 30. And I sometimes I put pieces of tape on their shoulders so I can keep track of who's who as they move around. But yeah, I very much appreciate when they want to be photographed, but I don't criticize anyone for not wanting to be photographed.
And that's true inside prison and out, for sure.
Yeah.
All right. We have time for one closing comment or a remark if anybody would like to ask one last question, or any of the photographers want to make any closing statements.
I'll say that I've really enjoyed getting to know these other artists who are presenting today. This is I'm now going to look up your work more thoroughly. I'll warn you. So thanks, Glenn, for bringing us together.
Sure, and it's a great opportunity as well for me to at least be together with you in the same space and see your faces. We've all communicated a lot by email over the last 3 or 4 months, and it's great to finally see you in person, so to speak. All right, well, I want to thank everybody. I want to thank our presenters, and I want to thank our audience. And just wish you all continued success with your photography that you're doing with this important subject in America. And keep in touch, everybody.
Thank you for
Thank you.
creating
Thanks
such a thoughtful issue. The Incarceration is really beautiful. It's really well
Oh,
done.
Thank you.
Beautiful
Looking
issue.
forward to seeing the hard copy.
Yeah, it's going in the mail. It's had a lot of delays. It was hung up in customs for over a week and just lots of things. Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Thank you.
You.
Hold on. Just hold on.